everything paranormal. Para X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Merry meet everyone, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron's Master Class. I see the professor is walking up to the podium. So, take a seat, get comfortable. The class is ready to begin.
And merry meet everybody, and welcome to this week's Master Class. Tonight's class will be taught by Christopher Balzano, and he's very familiar with students because he really is a teacher. And tonight he's moved it up to professor status, and he's got a sparkling podium and a wand that will zap any student who is misbehaving. Just know that. The class tonight is talking about legend tripping and ghost investigations. And I know that there are many ghost hunters that are going to be listening into this class, virtual classroom as we speak. And those of you who are listening live and are coming in the Para X chat room, comments and questions are always welcome. And if you're listening outside the chat room, come join us at paraxradionetwork.com. All right, Christopher, belly up to the podium.
Oh, my belly's touching, trust me.
Okay, now I just have a thing in my mind. Okay.
I'm with you.
But thanks for joining us, and it's an interesting topic, yeah.
This is, the topic that drives my life and the focus of what I've been doing for 30 years now. It seems crazy when I say that number. I do a tour, a haunted history tour, and I always say, I know I've been doing this for 30 years. I know I look young, and oddly enough, no one ever argues with me. They think, no, that's fine. You look right at that time. So this is great because and I want to encourage the audience to ask as many questions as possible. We call that the Socratic method in education, and it really kind of fuels the direction that I'm going to go in. So feel free to interrupt me with questions. And unlike my normal students, I'm hoping that everybody's phone is out.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so before I step aside and let you begin, explain what legend tripping is.
So when and actually this is probably the essence of what I am going to be talking about. So I'm going to take it maybe a few steps back, if that's okay with you, and I'm going to explain kind of where I'm coming from. And some of your listeners probably know some of this information, so I'll zip through it to get to the meat. But I always say that I'm a reformed paranormal investigator. And when I say that, I do not ever mean to say that I am anti-paranormal investigator. I never, regardless of the name of my book, one of my books, I never referred to myself as a ghost hunter. It was always a paranormal investigator. And to me, the distinction between that even was I never felt as if I was hunting something down. I am not a vegetarian, but I do not eat ghosts. And so to me, the term always felt kind of aggressive. And I always felt that the best part of paranormal investigating was being passive, allowing things to come to you, like creating the correct environment for something to happen, which even when I was an investigator was contrary to a lot of people. I think one of the interesting things when it comes to investigating is that people, it's funny, I was doing an event this weekend, and I had this guy who was next to me, and I was there to tell scary stories. And the guy next to me was from a local paranormal group. And I asked him, how long have you been doing this? He's like, well, the group's only been together for a year, but I've been doing this 3 years. And I was like, yeah, that's a really long time. And I don't mean to sound, to put down people who have not been doing this a long time, but I think that a lot of people have been who have been investigators or ghost hunters, based on their interest in the TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
And the TV shows, by their nature of being TV, have to be entertaining, and therefore some action has to constantly be happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that action often takes the form of provoking because it's good television. And so that's kind of, for me, like when I think of ghost hunting, I think of that kind of stuff, of like aggressively approaching a place that might be haunted. And I've been accused of being passive aggressive, but never aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the reasons why that term never appealed to me. So I was not influenced by the television shows. That's not why I got into this. I got into this because when I was a kid, I love to say that I'm from the first generation that had cable, right? And so when my parents went to bed, I was the kid sneaking downstairs to watch Rosemary's Baby and Nightmare on Elm Street and Poltergeist and all of these movies while they were asleep, and just like gripping my teddy bear, like as a little kid, being amazed by these. And I was a latchkey kid, but my parents didn't trust me in the house. So my latch was the public library.
Mm.
And I would get out of school at 2:30. I would have to walk, a mile in the snow both ways, to the local library. And it was, we'll pick you up when one of us is out of work. And so I was there every single weekday, for probably 3 or 4 hours.
Mm.
The librarian actually had to have a conversation with my mom. She's like, we're not daycare. And she's like, no, but I pay your money and he doesn't cause any trouble. So like, get off of our back.
Mm-hmm.
And I read everything and I consumed everything that was in. Now you have to keep in mind when I'm saying this, I'm like talking 2nd and 3rd grade. By the 4th grade, I was allowed up to read the adult books because my reading level was just ridiculous. Because all I did was read, right? It's not like I'm ridiculously intelligent. It just, all I did was read. And so an amazing thing happened then too. So now we're talking 1984, and we had the rise of a little author known as Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen King was a successful writer by then, but that's really when everything he touched, they were making commercials about his books on TV. And I would watch these. I'd be watching cartoons, and all of a sudden there would be a commercial for Pet Sematary. Go out and buy Pet Sematary. Crazy to think, right, nowadays, books, a commercial to go out and buy a book, right? Like, that's insane now if you think about it. And all of his books were being made into movies. And so I would watch the movie, and then I would go up to the adult section, and I would read the book, and I would read the 3 that were next to it. And all of this time, I'm consuming these horror stories, but then also consuming the Time Life books about ghosts, right? Mm-hmm. Every true folklore book I could possibly imagine. Everything about anything spooky. And it was the time when that was rising up, right? And then, of course, the Satanic Panic comes out, and I'm reading all the books, making sure to read all the books that they're saying are bad for you intentionally, because I was just so drawn to that stuff. By the time I get into college and I really start to focus this as something that's driving my life, I'm a writer, right? I originally went for film, but I'm a writer, and I'm getting yelled at by my professors because they want literature, literary fiction, and I'm writing H.P. Lovecraft, or my horrible attempt at it. And in the whole time I'm doing that, I am also I am also looking into stories, especially all around Boston. I'm from Boston, for those in the audience who don't know. And my dorm was the most haunted building in Boston. And I was just taking story after story of people having weird experiences, unexplained experiences. And then when I would ask them, what's the backstory? Like, why is that so? What have you heard of why these things are happening? They would tell me a story that I had heard time and time again in every part of the United States. And I'd start to say, wait a minute, it's impossible for the exact same story to happen time and time again. And that's when the little words that would change my mind for my world forever, urban legend, kind of started to creep into my brain. And I became obsessed with what I called at that time the crossroads. And the crossroads were the intersection of a true haunting and the stories we make up to try to understand it. And as I began to publish this stuff online, because the internet was now new, right? And I had the greatest URL of all time. My original website address was, and don't even try to type it in, people in the audience, because you won't be able to find it. It was www.geocities.com/Chris and Jenna 441 /Massachusetts Ghosts and Legends.
Oh, Jesus.
And I published it. It was a crossroads. It was the thing in my mind, and I published it with the intent of putting up my fiction, encouraging others to publish their fiction there, resources if you were trying to get published, and then the other part of the site, if you click on the other button, it goes to all the true ghost stories and the urban legends that I was looking into in the area. And needless to say, no one clicked on the fiction, and people were crazily fixing on the true ghost stuff.
Yeah.
And right before that had happened, this book came out that changed my life. Anyone from New England who's into ghosts has probably read this book, and it was the Ghost Files, right? New England Ghost Files by Charles Robinson. And it presented all of these different ghost stories that were true. And the way that he framed them kind of encapsulated what I enjoyed most about true ghost stories that were kind of left out there to be the reader and the person. It was left for them to decide whether or not the story was true. And that's going to come in huge, right? And so this book, and it was he was a sociologist. He didn't even necessarily believe in ghosts. He was tracking more of like folklore and local stories, and time again, he kept getting these ghost stories. And so he finally published a book about them. And he used to run, what I didn't know at the time was that he also wrote for one of the local papers in a town called Rehoboth, Massachusetts. So one Halloween, and this is the essence of what legend tripping is. I didn't even know I was legend tripping at the time. One Halloween, we decided, because so many of the stories in this book took place in Rehoboth, that we were going to go to Rehoboth and try to experience as many of the stories as he told in his book. And all the ones that we were looking into were public, they were free, and they had a backstory to them that made what was going on make sense. So it wasn't just, there's a ghost here. It was, there was a horrible fire. All these people died. To this day, they're still seen on that land. And we went out there, and we had amazing experiences. We took 5 rolls of film, which somehow disappeared between driving from Rehoboth back home to Boston. And that was always like a weird thing. We had taken all these pictures and nothing happened. Well, I published all of those stories about our experiences in Rehoboth. And the feedback was immense. Because what I didn't know at the time was that I was looking into the most haunted place in New England, which was the Bridgewater Triangle. And I know that that's something that you're familiar with, right? And the more that I published on Rehoboth, and it wasn't people coming to me or emailing me or whatever saying, oh, you're talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. It was people saying, I live in 2 towns over and I had this experience. It's weird because I was Googling the redheaded hitchhiker of Route 44 and I found your site, and I became, oddly enough, really, really well versed in the Bridgewater Triangle without knowing that it existed yet. And so as that kind of popularity of mine grew, people would then say, well, have you investigated? Or people would say, I also have a personal thing that happened. Can you come to my house and help me? And through conversations with people that I trusted and through, what books were out there at the time, Hans Holzer was a huge influence at that time. I began to investigate. And I would look into these houses, and I would now be trying to get evidence, trying to help these people prove things were, that there was a ghostly cause to this, or trying to kind of look into things and saying like, oh, wait a minute, this makes sense. There's something natural going on, or we can explain this. And at that time, I was using, radios tuned to AM, right? So forget about ghost boxes, right? I was scanning through AM stations, inviting ghosts to have conversations with me, right? Dowsing rods and Ouija boards, along with video games that, handheld video games that didn't work anymore the right way to try to get responses, right? I mean, we were trying everything, like the people that I was meeting, and we were out there just kind of doing that. And then obviously 2004 hits, and boom, the ghost hunters changed that entire landscape. And I rode that wave of popularity, and the equipment became more focused and more sophisticated. And I was never comfortable with that term, but I was very comfortable investigating, and I was living in New England. There was no end to the places that I could look into. I was meeting really amazing people. You and I were talking about on air. I never belonged to a group because I don't like to say that I wholly believe in one person's philosophy or their approach to things. And I never wanted to wear a black shirt. And so what happened is that I wrote a book called Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting. And like I said, didn't really like the title, but that's what was going to sell, right? And so this was a textbook. It was put out by Thomson West. I mean, it was a textbook company, and they were trying to establish a competitor with the dummy guides, right? And so this was their version, and they had, I think, maybe 10 titles, and there were only a few that were not paranormal. And I published Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting. I did Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film. Jeff Belanger did Picture Yourself Legend Tripping, which was kind of weird, being like where I am now. And then there was a Picture Yourself Being a Psychic from someone else. And then the rest of them were like Picture Yourself Drumming, Picture Yourself Woodworking, things like that. As I was doing that book, I sent out probably 50, 60 questionnaires to investigators and ghost hunters that I knew. And I asked them, how do you do what you do? What's your favorite piece of equipment? How do you approach this? All this kind of different stuff. And then towards the end, I asked them, why do you do this? Like, what's your goal? Like, what's your purpose with this? And I got a lot of different answers, but the ones that came up most frequently and overwhelmingly were, I want to prove that ghosts are real for people who don't believe that ghosts are real. And I want to help people, right? Those were the two ones that were overwhelmed. And then the very last question I asked was, if there's a non-believer, what piece of evidence can they see that will convince them that ghosts are real?
Now, I'm going to interrupt right now because
Okay.
I think for people in the chat room,
Yep.
why don't you answer that question, the one that you just asked? And
you want them to answer it?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I bet I'm going to get I bet what they're going to say is going to be what the answer was that every single investigator and ghost hunter that I gave this to gave me. Every single one gave the same answer.
Okay, repeat it again.
Okay. If you have a non-believer, what evidence can you produce? What can you do to convince them that ghosts are real? This is the part in the class where I wait patiently for people's hands to go up.
You want the Jeopardy theme? I won't do it. No.
Usually what I do is I go, think about that for a second. Think about that. And then I get them mad and I say, just so you know, like, animals react, humans think. So don't shout out an answer. Think about the question. Think about it.
Well, and see, you can't raise their hand. Well, they can, the ones that are listening now can raise their hands. It's not going to do any good. But we do have the chat room that they can talk to.
Okay.
And
let me know when you want me to give the answer.
Okay. Well, I'm waiting because it's a 30-second delay. And then,
okay?
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll talk about the first time that you were on the show. The first time I met you was about the Triangle book. Mm-hmm. That was how many years ago?
That book is now 15 years old. Actually, yeah, that book is, I think, now 17 years old, but yeah.
God, we go back.
We
didn't have gray hair, and yeah.
Most of my gray hair is confined to my beard, but still.
There you go. And when we get off a chair, we didn't grumble and mumble a little bit. Okay, one of the answers is, she says, it's Nyla, she says, I don't care if anyone else believes that ghosts are real. I know, and that's all. That's all I care about.
I love her. She's awesome.
And then...
she's a perfect legend tripper.
Yes. Another one, Sherry says, not even a ghost standing in front of skeptics slapping them would convince them. That's true. Nyla says, I don't waste my breath. Kathy says, no amount of evidence will convince them if they don't want to believe. And yeah.
Yeah. And so the number one answer that I got, and by number one I say, I'm talking literally every investigator gave the same answer, some form of the same answer, which was a personal experience.
Okay.
All of them said, and I wish I could give them that look, because they were literally saying that the majority of them were saying, I do this to help people, but I also do it to prove that ghosts are real, or to prove, and yet paradoxically they were saying, but no matter what I do, it's not going to work, because they have to have a personal experience. And that I was noticing that, right? And not only that, but in writing that book was probably the worst thing I could have done as an investigator, because I became a researcher into researchers, right? Like, I really started looking at what it was that investigators were doing and how far I had come from who I was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I never grew up. That part where they say, and then they found the grave, and his name was Seth. And you go, oh my word, the little girl was talking to someone who said it was named. And that, like, part of it, and that guttural, that kind of like visceral moment where the ghost story is true. And the potential for this to make sense was open. That's why I got into it. Never once was I reading a book that said, and then there was slightly more orange shading on a thermal imager, right? Like I was about the story, and I have no problem with that. And I understand both the physical and mainly the psychological reasons why investigating is appealing, but it wasn't appealing to me anymore. And at that time, it clicked. And my goal from then on has been to be a legend tripper, which is I find the small story, the small town in Florida, I live in Florida now, that a ghost story is being told by the community. There may be some trace of it on the internet, but it's something that the community, everybody is talking about it. Everyone says it. Everyone seems to know it. I'm being hyperbolic now, but like everyone seems to know it, and they say it and they spread it, and they look kind of like knowingly at each other when it's mentioned someplace. And I do as much research as I possibly can about the town, about the area, about the community. What do they love? What do they hate? What's the history of it? Why do they tell this story at this time in this way? And then I go out and I experience the legend just the way that they say you're supposed to experience it. I do not try to capture it. Like, we run video and audio because I do a podcast. But we don't have equipment with us, and we don't look, and much like the person who's commenting, I could care less whether you believe it or not. And there's been times when I will do like a library talk, and someone will say to me, like, yeah, well, what did you bring back that proves your story is true? And I said, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Sometimes, and our rule as a legend tripper is if we're listening back to the audio, which is usually us seeing if there's like quality stuff that we're talking about in the moment. If we don't hear an EVP while it's plugged in to the car on the ride home, we don't go searching for it. We don't, and yet we've gotten a ton of that stuff, right? We don't scour through, even though I still help other people take the best pictures of ghosts that they can, we don't look at our photos afterwards with the intent of finding ghosts in the shadows. Instead, it's about the story, it's about the history, and it's about being in that moment and having some really profound things happen. And when you take away the visor of, I need to now take this and use it to prove that ghosts are real or to share that ghosts are real, and instead it's just, wow, this is touching me deeply, and it's a really great story. like the backstory is a really great story. In every single one of the legend trips I've done, I would say the ghost story rules over my experiences there. My experiences there, and this is kind of what the rest of the talk will be about. My experiences there are about being an example for what the community says is going on, but then also for being you, being the person who lives in someplace nowhere near this haunted legend, and you get to jump on my back and experience what the community has been talking about sometimes for generations.
I've got a quick question from the chat room, and then we're going to take a break, okay?
Okay.
She says, having grown up no more than 2 miles from where the family lived The Exorcist is based on, and finding the original newspaper article written on the incident in my local library, I've been even more interested in researching hauntings before I do any investigating. So would you consider me a legend tripper?
Very interesting. Okay, so great question. I love this. Well, who asked that?
Tabby Cat.
Kathy?
Tabby, like kitty cat.
Tabby. Okay.
Yeah.
Kitty cat. Okay. So here's kind of the foundation of what I do is the story's been told multiple times, usually for at least a generation, and it occurs multiple times, right? Like, so in other words, one of the problems that cryptozoologists have, and people who go looking for Bigfoot, and even people who go for looking UFOs, there was a sighting in this location. More UFOs too. There was a sighting in this location in 1968, and they all still go there. And so it's like, well, I would love to look at, as the folklorist in me wants to take the Exorcist case and do a whole episode about its impact on things, right? But the legend tripper in me says, what is there, right? Like, what necessarily is there in that place? Now, if you're talking that has sparked something in you, and now you want to look at things all around Georgetown, like, that is the essence of legend tripping, right? So think of it like this. We all have some place from wherever our hometown is, wherever we grew up, wherever we were in our teens and 20s, that everyone said was haunted. Like, oh, don't go to that place, things happen. Or the exact opposite. Everyone goes to this location, or everyone goes to this cemetery, and you have to knock on this one particular headstone 3 times, and Mary shows up. Or you go to that spooky house down the street, and you have to knock on the door. Or here are where the ghost lights come. Let's go make out while we wait. That's kind of the essence of like the beginnings of legend tripping. People who take it not quite as seriously as I do, but that's the root of it. That's the entry point.
Okay. All right. Let's break, and we'll call it a recess, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes. Everybody, hang still.
There's more Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks right after these important messages.
Kick off the Halloween season on September the 28th at the very haunted Merchant and Drovers Tavern Museum in Rahway, New Jersey, with Bruce Tango and Krista Cesare. Chris will be talking about his true, terrifying experiences while attending college back in 1985, and will be showing his award-winning film, Please Talk With Me. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Bruce will be telling some of his true ghost stories in the way that only Bruce can. He has a way of telling a story that will have you shaking in your boots one minute and then having you laugh your butts off the next.
Hi everyone, this is Krista Cesare. I want to invite you and yours to join me and my good friend Bruce Tango on this night of all things ghostly and things that go bump in the night. In addition to my film and Bruce's storytelling, there will also be an EVP session with playback right away to see if we caught anything. Let's see what the Merchant and Drovers resident ghosts have to say. I sincerely hope that you and yours can join us for an evening of chills and thrills.
For all of the evening's details and ticket information, go to brucetango.com ASAP. This is going to be one scary night.
Hi, this is Marla, and if you're enjoying tonight's masterclass and you want to hear it again, you'll be able to find it at the show's YouTube channel, which is Stirring the Cauldron Para X. And it'll be up there, well, forever. And you'll also find dozens of Stirring the Cauldron podcasts as well. And while you're there, why not subscribe? It's free. And whatever metaphysical area you're interested in, you'll find something to catch your eye, I'm sure. Well, thank you for listening in to tonight's class. And now I'll let you get back to your regular scheduled programming.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And I'm trying to undo the mute button. Okay. Our professor for tonight's class is Christopher Balzano, and we're talking about legend tripping versus ghost investigations. And let's get on with it.
Excellent. Okay, so I once again, I want to state everything that I'm saying. I am not anti-investigator. I'm a 100% true believer in your path in the paranormal is your path in the paranormal. And if you enjoy equipment and you enjoy technology and it feels more real to you that way, or it satisfies what you're trying to do, go ahead and do that. One of the things that I do that's not always recommended is research before I go. And that is 90% of the time, the majority of the research that I do happens before. And unlike, and I always pick places that aren't well covered. So I'm in Florida. I'm not sure how many of your listeners are in Florida. But everyone always asks me, oh, so you've been to St. Augustine? And I go, no, I really haven't. Like, it's not for me. And what? Because everyone does St. Augustine. Everyone knows. What could I possibly add to it by doing what I do there when it's really, really well covered? So instead of St. Augustine, you can find me in places like Holiday, Florida, in Boyette, Florida, in the worst Florida name of a town. It's literally called Lorida, Florida. It's spelled Lorida, Florida. I've recently found out that it's pronounced Loretta. And these are places that are, they're washed away. And this is, again, I'm recommending best practices for legend tripping. They're washed away of media influence, and they're washed away of commerce. So I'm a teacher, which means I ain't got a lot of money. And so what I do is I look for places that are open to the public, that are accessible if you're willing to go. Oftentimes it's through the woods, or it's through a swampy area, or it's, a bridge in the middle of the night. But it's still one of those things where once you get into, and so as a legend tripper, I strongly recommend against haunted hotels, right? Or haunted restaurants. And it's not that I don't trust those people. Like, I don't think that, a haunted restaurant is genuinely haunted. It just has, it's got some meat in the game, right? It's got some skin in the game. And so it's worth for them to exaggerate to kind of heighten certain moments in certain places. So the number one rule that I have, which we occasionally break, is the idea that don't go anywhere you have to pay. It's funny because I've had investigation groups come up to me at events or whatever, and they show me my book. One of my books is called Haunted Florida Love Stories. And when they come up to me, they say, "Oh, can you sign this?" Okay, I sign it. And then I open up the cover and I notice that there are X's on the chapters. And I say, what are these for? And they say, those are the places we've been to. Thank you. And so I guess the difference in what I'm saying is that one of the things I've discovered about investigators is not all of them, but they're very guarded about the places that they go. And if that's a private location, if that's a personal house, that makes sense to me. But then you get groups who have a haunted location, and it's their location. And they somehow become the gatekeepers of this place. And I don't think that that's right. And so I offer clearly where are the places that I'm going. Here's when you should go. And then I start the research. And the research to me always goes, what are people saying? What's the backstory? Now let's look into the backstory. Like, what in this backstory can I go out and prove? So, for example, we were just talking about Loretta, Florida. Loretta, Florida involves a man who killed a witch killed a witch on a bridge when he was buying a love potion and the deal went sour, right? And so rather than pay her fee, which ended up becoming his firstborn child, he killed her, right? Mm-hmm. And so when he killed her, he fled the town buries her, and she keeps appearing on this bridge. And as she's appearing on the bridge, the town starts to fail. And as the town starts to fail, they start to blame it on the witch. And so they dig her up and they move her different places further and further away from town, thinking that this will help, until they eventually burn her and scatter her ashes in a completely different county. Oh. But she continues to come around, right? And as a matter of fact, I believe when we went there, you gave us the recipe for the love potion, if I'm not mistaken, right? So you know the story that I'm talking about. And so the essence of that story was that there was a ghost on a bridge. So what can we say about that bridge? And so the research began with the bridge, right? Was there ever any deaths associated with it? Is there any way that we can say that that an old woman died and her death was covered? So rather than spending the money that an investigator might spend on equipment, I spend it on newspaper.com, on Ancestry subscriptions, right? Like I spend it on that kind of stuff. And we try to say, is there anything about the death part of it that's true? In that case, we scoured newspapers and old reports, and what we were able to find is there was an aspect of the story where they go to her house and burn that down too, right? Like, if this isn't working, let's go burn down her old shack. And I was able to find a newspaper article that said the people burned down this old shack in the woods around the time that this story is supposed to take place. And to me, that was like, oh my word, we found like some confirmation of this, right? The fact of the matter is that people for 70 years have been seeing this woman on the bridge. And recently, within the last 30 years, people have also been seeing a man and his little child on the bridge as well, which I loop into, well, it looks like he didn't get away as cleanly as he thought, right? In the same location, if we have a man, a child, and a woman who wanted the child from the man, maybe this kind of trifecta is doing something. But then a legend tripper is really looking for, what does this say about that community? Why did they make up this story? Like, this is Rapunzel, right? I mean, it's Rapunzel, not Rapunzel, it's Rumpelstiltskin with classic outsider, we don't like the witch, something happens and we blame her edges to it, right? And so the next level of the research became, what's up at the town? Like, what happened to the town? It's a ghost town now. What happened to it? And what you find is that during the time when this story is being created, the town starts to fail. Like, all these towns, these small towns in Florida that were they all have a very similar story to them. It starts to fail. And all these men go off to fight in World War II, and many of them die. And then a whole bunch more say, I've now experienced the world. I'm never going back to Laredo, Florida. Like, that sounds horrible compared to the rest of the world, right? And so little by little, the town starts to fail because people start to leave, businesses start to dry up. And what you have there then not only becomes a ghost story, but it's the story of the town. It's the story of this small town couldn't deal with its own failings, and so they created a boogeyman. So what I always encourage people to do is, A, you research the details of the haunting. B, you research the details of the town, especially during its origin, like the origin of the story, and how, when the history of the town changes, the story itself changes, right? Mm-hmm. And then the third part, which is where I do a lot of my work, and so if you're going to do this, it's kind of something you have to train yourself in, is what other story is this like? Right? This idea that there's a witch and for some reason the town fails because of that witch's presence. And the town takes vengeance. And that vengeance leads to that spirit returning to the spot time and time again to point the finger at the guilty, even though the guilty aren't there anymore. And that's, for me, when you really start to explore what ghost stories have to say about the living as well as the dead.
That's interesting.
So this is me dramatically pausing to see if there are any questions.
No, they've got their ears and listening hard.
That's my curse, right? I'm too much of a storyteller.
No, storytellers are wonderful.
No, I'm with you. And so that involves a lot of travel. And it involves a lot of time spent not in the field. So there was a guy years ago out of the Cape, and I was doing our good friend. I was doing back in the days when I used to host with Ron Kolick.
Mm-hmm. Everybody's doing that. Yeah.
Everyone's hosted at some point or another, right? Like I did a 2-month stint hosting his show back when he was still out of the local radio station in Lawrence, Mass. And I so you probably know Derek Bartlett. And we were interviewing him, and he said something along the lines of, he wasn't trying to be insulting, but he said something to the effect of not that I was an armchair investigator, but something to the effect of well, the majority of work you do is in books. And I remember at the time feeling like he was insulting me, and Derek is a friend. He wasn't trying to, but as if there was something dirty about that. And I know that if you are working with a psychic on your investigation team, one of the big things is I don't want to know anything about the location before I go. And that to me is not the essence of legend tripping at all. I want to know every single thing that I can possibly know. And I also strongly encourage all legend trips should be 2 visits. I think you need to explore the area during the daytime. And that's not only for safety reasons, right? You want to know where you're going. That way, when it's dark out, if you're doing the second part in the dark, you know where you are and you have some kind of orientation. But it's also for context. And I'm going to tell you another witch's story. And this one involved, it was supposed to be, even though I've disproved this, it's supposed to be the story was the inspiration for the Blair Witch, but it's totally not. And it takes place in this forgotten town in Florida called Pemberton Ferry, which has been wiped from history. And the backstory is kind of sketchy, but it's very similar in terms of they found the witch, they tried her in the swamp, and they hung her there, right? And so this witch has been messing with the campground now that's nearby. Her figure is seen walking on the paths in that little swampy area near the campgrounds, but she slams the campground doors. She's known to scratch at tents. She's heard laughing and cackling. Sometimes people disappear. So it's all these things that are very similar to the Blair Witch, but it's not the inspiration for it. And so when we went there during the day, and we found the exact location where someone had been hung, right? We did that because, and this is, again, legend tripping is different than investigating. Investigating, it's almost by its very nature, you have to be organized, right? You have to be, here's my grid. I set things up. I go from place to place. There's some reaction to it, but because you're trying to create, and many times, a duplicatable situation, right? And a situation that you can document, that you've done this, you've done this, you've done this, you were here, you were here, you were here. It's a lot less pliable, right? And so legend tripping is the exact opposite. Our motto is #follow the signs. And during that, we were on the path because the ranger told us to stay on this path, blah, blah, blah. So we were on the path, and we were watching a tree branch, which was more like a vine because it went all the way to the ground. It was about an arm thick, and some unseen hand seemed to be shaking it. And so we went off the path. I got plenty of ticks during this one. We went off the path to where this tree was, and we found hanging in the trees a noose. Now, that noose has been there only half the times that I've been there. And other people who have followed my kind of directions to it have, some have seen the noose and some have not. It has a tendency to appear and disappear at will. Now, an investigator, no way that they would allow for that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they want to be able to touch it. They want to be able to explain it, understand it. So you have to surrender to the idea of, like, I have no solution to this. But the important thing that we discovered was this. A few months after we went, we were scanning some other newspapers, so it's very hard to find references to Pemberton Ferry. And we found multiple news reports from all across the country. Like, the story caught on and was published all throughout the country of essentially these two black men had been doing some bad things. And so the law and some people caught up to them, dragged them into this swamp in Pemberton Ferry, hung them from trees, and lit them on fire. Mm. So what we have here is, I think, an extremely haunted location. It's not haunted by what people are saying it's haunted by, right? They've literally washed the history of what really happened away. But here's the important thing. Here's the context part. Feet away from where we found the noose, there was this little path, and when we followed this little path, which was a natural path, not like a park path, we found this giant, almost a perfect circle, natural water formation with all of these trees, which you could call fairy trees. They're sometimes called witches' trees, that have like the inside bark kind of taken out of them. All these trees were around this swampy area, which was almost in a perfect circle, and the algae was glowing green. And there is no way that you could not look at this and think it was supernatural. And to think, yeah, if there's ever anything that is the folklore version of a witch's ring, this is it. And so context of what the physicality is and the physical location is of these haunted legends is crucial for a good legend tripper. You have to go there and you have to see what the environment is like and why would they make up this story. And so it makes complete sense to me. You've got someone hanging from a tree sometimes. You've got dark forces in the woods, and you've got this witch's ring. It has to be witches.
Of course. They blame it on us.
Of course. Aren't they to blame for everything?
Yeah, well, we understand. I've got one more question from the chat room, and you've got like 3 minutes to answer it, okay?
Okay. That's hard for me. Okay.
I know. I'm just giving you a warning. She says, some believe that doing such research before an investigation may cause you to be biased towards a possible haunting and come to the conclusions that you shouldn't. How to make sure such research does not taint the investigation?
It's not an investigation. I want to go there so ridiculously tainted. I want to see exactly what the community sees. That's the difference between legend tripping and investigating. Do you understand? Like, I am not looking to explain what the ghost is. I'm looking to try to understand why the people tell the story. Does that make sense? And so I want to be biased. And then the folklorist in me and the kind of the critical mind is able to be like, I just experienced something. To try to capture it or understand it is not my objective. afterwards, I take the step back and I say, okay, I get it. We had this experience. I can understand why the community tells this. And what I do is I embrace both things. I embrace what the community is saying that it is, and then what the actual haunting might be. So the idea of going in and being tainted to me means that I've got the pulse of the community. Like, I'm understanding the ghost story, which for a legend tripper is extremely important.
Okay, that makes good sense.
Yeah, I mean, you have to change your mindset if you want to do it. If you don't want to do it, that's perfectly fine, but you do have to change your mindset of, like, I'm not looking to understand. I'm looking to understand why they tell the story and how they tell the story and how it's changed.
Yeah. All right, well, we're tripping the clock, and we just have a few minutes for you to tell everybody where they can find you, your books and your podcast. Yeah. Speak up.
So the podcast is on every single platform you can possibly imagine for the most part. The name of the show is called Tripping on Legends. And we do, in addition to Florida stuff, especially because I do a lot of episodes with my teenage daughter, we also kind of conquer digital legends and like media legends and modern folklore and stuff like that. And the name of the show is just Tripping on Legends. And you can find information about me at facebook.com/Tripping on Legends. The name of the website is trippingonlegends.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram at Spooky Tripping. And then TikTok, because I think that's a huge, important aspect of modern haunted folklore, is also Tripping on Legends. And then my books or anything like that, if you're in Florida, you can go to Walgreens and get them, which blows me away. But otherwise, you can go to Amazon and find all of them, or you can go to the website. And if you go to the website, you have the added bonus of getting it for a little less money and getting my signature if that means something to you.
Very good. Well, this has been really interesting, and I always thought it was kind of the historical background is what you're talking about, basically about legend tripping or legends, but there's all kinds of different types of legends. But I think you did a good job of explaining, and maybe people will try that as well.
It's one of those things where if you try both aspects, maybe you get an even more complete picture of the paranormal. Try doing it both ways to the same location. Yeah,
exactly. All right. Well, thanks for doing the class. I think, you should come back sometime and do another one. And actually we could, make it a longer one if need be. So that's good. And, well, sometimes we get going and then we have to leave. And that's kind of like, yeah. So, yeah, think about it. And
I'm always willing to talk to you.
Okay. Thank you. And let's thank all the ones who listened and all your students. And you didn't have to zap anybody with the wand, so that's good. And those that are listening on podcast, we like you too. And you can join us sometimes for real. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Stirring the Cauldrons Masterclass. Please join us at the same time for another great class and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2024. The Holiday Weasel by Kevin MacLeod is licensed through Incompetech.